Hey, welcome back PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and today we're going to revisit the Canon EOS R1. You see, we've played with a pre-production model in Phoenix, Arizona. Definitely you should check out that video. It's very interesting, but we really had a lot of things that we still wanted to test on a production camera. We're going to do that today, and we're going to give you our final thoughts. But before we get into that, you know, Black Friday is coming up, the holiday season, Christmas is around the corner. It's time to start shopping for gifts. You do not want to be that person on Christmas Eve. You know you don't this year. So one great thing to check out is KH.com. You see, everybody's looking for Black Friday deals on brand new camera gear, but there's a whole world of excellent used camera equipment out there in great shape with lots of life left in it, and you can get that for a really good price. Okay, so here's a gift idea. If you've got somebody younger in the family, they're looking to get into photography and really explore it. Analog is so popular right now with the young crowd. There's so many good used cameras out there at KH.com. You can see on their website exactly what you're going to get before you buy it, what the condition is, what accessories it comes with, and you know that their expert staff have checked over everything. If there's any problems, KH is going to take care of you. You know, maybe you have nostalgic grandparents that regret selling a camera in the past. You can find it for them again on KH.com, or maybe an enthusiastic photographer in the family that wants something new. KH.com also sells new equipment and so much more. So definitely check them out. They're the best. That's why they're PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. I think it's important to understand that the Canon EOS R1 is Canon's true flagship camera. I mean, this is their most expensive body by far. They put all of their latest technology into it, and it is really made for a specialized crowd, a niche group of photographers. So hopefully today you'll have a better understanding if this is something that you really need to get for yourself. First thing I want to talk about though is the handling on this camera. So one thing I've always really appreciated about Canon is I feel that they make very intuitive, ergonomically well-designed bodies, and I love the Canon EOS R1 body design. I actually think it's great. I hate battery grips that are integrated, but this is probably the first body where I actually don't mind it. I still don't use it. I crank my hand over, but I don't mind having it on there, and that's because I feel like the size of this camera for flagship is basically perfect. But more importantly, it's a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller than maybe like a classic flagship DSLR. A 1DX is going to be 100 grams heavier than this. This comes around approximately 1,100 grams, but it's significantly smaller and it just feels more compact and lighter on the go. So the EOS R1 is very reminiscent to the EOS R3 body. They have a similar design structure, which is why I probably like the EOS R3 as well. But this is definitely designed to be as rugged as possible, even more so than the R3. And that is one of the reasons why you spend the money to get a high-end flagship camera like this. You intend to take it into the roughest of zones, war zones, and inclement weather, and crazy storms and stuff. And a camera like this is designed to survive that. One thing that you really notice right off the bat is this textured grip. I mean, I just keep thinking it's like corrugated steel, but it absolutely is very comfortable to hold on to. The grip feels nice, even for my smaller hands. I can reach everything comfortably. Now, admittedly, a camera like this is made for advanced photographers. It's got so many controls. It's very customizable, and there is a learning curve. It takes a while to get this squared away to work exactly the way that you want it to, but that's part of the beauty too. Canon doesn't force you down any particular pathways. They really give you many different options on how you want the camera to behave, how you want the controls to work. You know, the smart controller, for example, it's a good example. I don't use it. I don't like it. I don't think it's a very effective interface. I prefer having the classic autofocusing joystick on the back. This smart controller also has a half press function. I just personally don't use that either. I just push it all the way down as an AF on button. But that's the beauty of a system where you can set it up to work the way that you want it to. Otherwise, for professional photography, you've got all the connectivity here. Full HDMI port, PC sync for flash, Ethernet, Wi-Fi. We got the classic LP19 battery, same thing that we had on the EOS R3, but it lasts so long. Now, when it comes to media, this is interesting. This is the first Canon body we've seen that now has twin CF Express Type B card slots, not the 4.0 protocol. But the fact of the matter is this camera has an insane buffer. I mean, huge. The fact that you can shoot 40 frames per second on this camera in RAW, using compressed RAW and going for over 10 seconds, you've got a huge buffer. I mean, if you're shooting JPEGs or if you're shooting at a slower burst rate, this thing is just going to go and go and go. So I think the speed's appropriate. So Canon actually have quite an achievement here when it comes to the sensor in this camera. It's a 24 megapixel stacked CMOS chip with one of the fastest readout speeds we've seen on any full frame sensor. We're clocking this out around 1/350th of a second. That's even faster than the Nikon Z8, Z9 sensor. And so this has some very interesting ramifications. First off, the mechanical shutter in this camera, it gives you a maximum flashing speed of 1/200th of a second. I honestly kind of wonder why they even decided to put a mechanical shutter in here, because In electronic shutter mode, this is going to give you 320th of a second maximum flashing speed. It really does let you cut some of that ambient light out, and it gets it up to some very competitive numbers that you would see out of other cameras. I mean, things like, for example, the Sony A1, that mechanical shutter can shoot 400th of a second using their own TTL flash system. And of course, the A9 III with a global shutter, you can do whatever you want, whatever flashing speed. But otherwise, this is very competitive. Now, while we expand on the image quality capabilities of this sensor, I mean, 24 megapixels. I do prefer a higher megapixel count for a lot of my work. I'd prefer to have 45 or even 60, but I'm not a sports photographer or journalist, and that's exactly who this camera is aimed at. And what Canon is deciding is that 24 megapixels is enough for those uses, and I think in those specific cases, it absolutely is. This sensor is very good. I mean, we're getting 14-bit RAWs, even shooting electronic shutter mode, so you're not really giving up any dynamic range. And the dynamic range here is going to actually have some slight advantages over something like the Sony A9 III with its global shutter. I mean, overall, look, I'm very happy with the images that I get out of this camera. I think they're fantastic. Does Canon still bake in noise reduction into the RAWs? Yes, absolutely. And do you lose a little bit of detail? Yes, you do. That's just a Canon thing. And, you know, there are these AI features that Canon's touting. So first off, there's an up-resing resolution function that only works on JPEGs. I don't like it. I mean, I didn't like it in pre-production. I don't use it now. There is an AI-based noise reduction, which actually is very effective. It works on the RAW files in the camera. It does a pretty good job. But yeah, if I guess I really needed to get photos out of the camera right away and I just wanted to clean them up, this will give me less noise, especially using that AI noise reduction. But most of the time, I'm just going to do it in Lightroom. I mean, why? Why? Now, the EVF on this camera is fantastic. 9.44 million dots, no drop in resolution when you're autofocusing or anything like that, 0.9 times magnification, very bright, very sharp. I do love having a high resolution EVF, especially for things like playback mode, to zoom in and just make sure that everything's in focus, and it's gorgeous. Now, I know I did earlier say that Canon has thrown all of their latest technology at it. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't come with the screen. There's one exception. The LCD panel, this is basically the same as the R5 Mark II. It's fine. It's still 2.1 million dot LCD touchscreen, full articulation, nothing wrong with that. But yeah, they actually downgraded a little bit from the R3. Oh, and guys, here's another improvement that I can give you on the production camera versus the pre-production camera. It comes to this hot shoe cover. It's designed to be fully weather sealed, super rugged, yada, 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 but it was impossible to get off on the pre-production camera. So the huge improvement now, this is the most important thing on the entire camera, by the way. On the production R1, now, if I place it, you know, on a firm surface here, I bear down with all my weight and I push it from the front. Look at that. Ooh, it comes off and I don't even have to sand this down or clip it off with scissors or anything. Okay, so another very important revelation actually is the eye control autofocus. This is Canon's proprietary autofocusing system that actually tracks the movement of your eyeball in the EVF and then moves a reticle around, which actually should be a very intuitive way to focus. So we've talked about this at length. On the pre-production cameras, I did have some issues getting things calibrated, but I've since wanted to test that again here on a production R1. I also want to preface this with saying that I always have really liked the eye control autofocus system. I've been a proponent of it, and I found that it worked really well on the EOS R3. To be fair, on the R5 Mark II and the R1 now, they have this new system with a wider area inside the EVF, which should give you better accuracy when using the eye control autofocus. I actually find it more difficult to get these cameras calibrated, both the R5 II and the R1, and that's very strange. It'll work for a while. I can get it to calibrate horizontally. I can get it to calibrate vertically, and then what eventually starts happening is just get failure notices over and over and over. And this is important because you want to refine the eye control autofocus with multiple setups under many different lighting conditions to get it to work properly. I found with the R1, I could get it to kind of work. The reticle would sometimes be a little bit higher than my eye point, and I found I'd have to actually compensate by looking down further, and that was actually quite frustrating. So I don't know what happened. The R3 always did better for me than these two cameras have, and I'm still able to do it. There's a lot of people where it just fails right off the bat. So I gotta be honest, I was actually a little disappointed at how fiddly the R1's eye control autofocus setup has been. I hope that they improve that in some way with firmware. I don't know what's gonna happen, but your mileage is gonna vary. Try it out and see if it works for you, because when it works, it's very intuitive. But luckily, there's so many other ways to autofocus the EOS R1. And so we wanted to set up a good sporting event test now using a production R1. And so we had a contact, a good friend of ours, David Watling. He's the official photographer for the Calgary Canucks junior hockey team. And so he got us in there with special access. It was really cool to shoot the hockey game.
from the bottom, now I'm rising from the grind. Hustling through the darkness, vision clear in my mind. Dreams ain't just for dreaming, I've been scheming on the low. Turning every setback into fuel, let it grow. They doubted my ambition, said I'd never touch the sky. But my wheels are rocking and I'm ready to defy. Look at all these mountains, conquered each and every one. Came from nothing, now I'm here, witness how it's done.
So I had a fun time shooting hockey. I'm no hockey photographer, all right, but I was able to glean a lot of information from this. One of the reasons we wanted to shoot hockey is that it specifically is not on the Canon EOS R1's action priority list of sports. And just to give you context there's 3 sports that you can set: volleyball, basketball, and soccer. And when you set these priority modes, the autofocus is geared with AI to be very predictive for that particular kind of sport. It'll follow the soccer ball properly. It'll see the basketball and know where the player will probably be and where the focus should go. So this gave me an opportunity to test the camera without having that action priority advantage. The Digic-X processor here has a very advanced human detection algorithm for bodies, and I actually could see that working quite well when shooting hockey. So it can do things like go to the eye, but then go to the head if that's what it sees, then go to the torso or other body parts, basically dissecting the human body down and tracking where it needs to track. And I could actually see this in action. Remember, these hockey players have face shields on, helmets on, but if it could see an eye, even far away, it would absolutely lock on. And if it couldn't, I could then see it go to the player's helmet and head. And if it didn't do that, I could see it go to the torso. Suffice to say, it was very impressive. It tracked very well, and I found that my hit rate was incredibly high. And you can set and customize what the tracking does, how sticky it is, whether it's responsive to new subjects or if it stays locked on an original subject. It's a vastly simplified menu system than we've seen before on Canon flagship bodies, and I do think that's a positive thing. You don't have all the different case studies anymore. You basically can just set a very simple interface for responsiveness, and I think that actually worked quite well. There were some situations where it maybe would lose the subject, go to somebody else, but I could very quickly just reacquire focus. But for the most part, it did a really good job, and I think an even more experienced sports photographer than myself could get fantastic results almost all the time. The R1 also has a functionality where it can remember and then track a particular individual's face. You know, if you had a celebrity sports player that you really want to give preference to. But for hockey, I mean, I don't want to give preference to particular players. I don't use it. But I will say the autofocusing experience overall, very intuitive, very customizable. It worked very well. It was actually very reminiscent of like my experience with Sony real-time tracking. So there's more to talk about with video. Let's go to Jordan next.
All right, Jordan, to talk about video performance on the Canon R1 that is filming me right now. And when I first saw the R1 specs, I was like, what? These are Canon R3 specs. It does have a lot in common. At its highest end recording, we have the ability to capture 6K raw video up to 60 frames per second, and that's recorded internally with Canon's raw light codec, which is actually quite efficient. But if we're going to record standard 10-bit 4K recording, well, there we've got the ability to do it up to 120 frames per second, and now we don't have to go into slow motion in order to access that. And it's oversampled up to 60 frames per second. Oddly, even though the sensor is fast enough for it, the 4K 120 is subsampled on this camera. And what I would have really loved to see here is the ability to record the 6K image in a compressed 10-bit format. But unfortunately, if you want the most resolution this camera is capable of, you're going to have to go over to RAW. So that's all quite similar to the Canon R3, but they've made a massive improvement if you are shooting 10-bit, and that is that this now captures the C-Log2 profile, which gets you a much wider dynamic range than the C-Log3 that we see on most of Canon's consumer mirrorless cameras, a profile I'm not a big fan of, and I really do enjoy working with C-Log2 footage and the wider dynamic range that it offers. As well, when I'm filming myself like I am right now, I do really appreciate having the tally lamp. It's very bright and very visible, even when you're shooting outdoors. Canon has also rectified one of the weirdest and most baffling decisions on the R3, and that was the use previously of a micro HDMI cable on that very large body. Well, thankfully they've fixed that now. We've moved over to a full-size HDMI, so it's not going to fall out of the camera all the time, and it's not going to break like those micro connections. But due to the intended audience of this camera, I really wanted to give a good look at the R1 autofocus. And I did struggle a lot with the R3. When it was in video mode, I just found, even with its stickiness cranked all the way up, it would constantly be looking for a new subject to focus on. Where when we were shooting indoor sports or when we were shooting the hockey, I found it would find a player, and yes, occasionally it did lose it, but it certainly felt a lot more sticky to me, which is really important if you're planning to use this camera to shoot sports and action. So as a video camera, I would say the R1 is absolutely a much better option than the R3, almost solely because of getting that C-Log2 profile if you're going to be shooting log, but the more tenacious autofocus does really make a big difference as well. But if your main priority isn't getting a very high frame rate stills camera, then I do definitely think there's better hybrid mirrorless video options out there, like the flagship cameras from Nikon and Sony that are going to offer you more high resolution compressed recording and still very tenacious autofocus. But if you're grabbing the R1 primarily for stills, you're not going to be disappointed with the video capabilities.
So I think the greatest strength of the Canon EOS R1 is just how specialized a tool it is and how effective it is at shooting sports, action, and journalism. And if I was a Canon shooter and that was my raison d'etre, this is the tool to get, absolutely. But its greatest weakness is also that it is a specialized tool for just sports, action, and journalism. A Z8 or Z9 can certainly shoot sports and action, maybe not as fast as this, but they will also do a better job for things like landscape or wildlife or general purpose photography, studio portraiture. And this again is really made for the sports, action, and journalist shooter. What it has as advantages: fantastic autofocus, an incredibly big buffer that can shoot on and on and on, and 40 frames per second raw. I mean, that's faster than the Z8 and Z9. That's very effective. The main competition then for this camera is going to be the baby brother to this, the Canon EOS R3, which has actually dropped in price quite significantly and is also a very effective specialized tool for sports, action, and journalism, or the Sony A9 III. And frankly, the A9 III with its global shutter, it does bring a lot of very interesting technology to the table. It beats this for sync speed, it beats this for burst rates with RAW, and it certainly has a fantastic buffer as well. I still do feel, though, that this camera has slightly better image quality than the Sony A9 III, and I do personally like the ergonomics and handling better than that camera. And compared to the EOS R3, this is absolutely a better video camera, no doubt about it. So hopefully this video helps you guys decide if this camera is right for you. It is very much a specialized tool, but there is a lot to love here. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Do leave your comments and questions below. We'll absolutely answer that. We like to do that on the PetaPixel podcast, which you can see on this exact same channel, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. As well, we've opened up membership on the PetaPixel website. This is a great opportunity not only to support us and all the excellent staff at PetaPixel, but also to be able to see that content ad-free. As always, love you lots. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel shortly.